Hey everyone, back with another math video here. This is for lesson 8.1. This is the first actual lesson of dividing with fractions. So we're going to go ahead and jump in. The first thing you're going to be needing is your math notebook, and I just have a piece of paper here so that it's easier for me to show. But go ahead and add dividing fractions and whole numbers to your table of contents and then whatever page number you're on. There we are. Okay, the first thing we have to talk about when we're discussing division is what division is. And I'm sure you guys all know that it's a mathematical operation, but what are we actually doing when we divide something? What happens to our numbers typically? We know that if we have something like 12 divided by 2, our answer would be 6. So typically when we divide, our numbers get smaller. Okay, so basically what's happening with division, I'll just kind of write this out here. Excuse me. Division is breaking something apart into equal groups. And if you hear that clicking back there, that would be the heater. Just being obnoxious like always. Anyway, division is breaking something into equal groups, and we'll see what this looks like when we get going. But that's essentially what division is if I have 3 things and I want to break them into equal groups, how would that be? How much would be in each group? The other thing we have to keep in mind, especially when we're talking about dividing fractions and whole numbers, is that we're going to be seeing some inverse operations. And we already saw this in our first video when we did the Show What You Know. That was on there for a short section. So we're just going to write inverse operations in our notebooks again so that we remember what they are. And if you already know what they are, you can pause the video and write that in. And if you have forgotten what they are, I want you to pause the video now and go back in your math notebook and look up what inverse operations are, because we have talked about them before. So I want you to find that information real quick before you continue. If you've clicked play again and you're ready to roll, then I'm assuming you have written down our definition for inverse operations, which is opposite operations that undo each other. Opposite operations that undo each other. So in this case, if I do a little division, what operation would I need to do to undo that? And you can go ahead and write that in your notebook too. If you wrote multiplication, that is fabulous. Multiplication and division are inverse operations. They undo each other. And we're going to be seeing that a little later on in this video. So before we get into our books, before we take even a look at the pages that I sent home with you, I want to talk about how we go about dividing fractions and whole numbers. The first situation we're going to look at is when I have a whole number divided by a fraction. Whole number divided by a fraction. Okay? So it would look something like this. If I have 3 divided by a half, what would that look like? What would my answer be? Now in our heads, we can kind of look at the opposite side of this. If we turn that into a multiplication sign, we would know automatically, oh, you just put 3 over 1 and then you go across. Well, with division, it's a little different. We can't really do that with dividing whole numbers and fractions. We can't just put 3 over 1 like we used to when we multiplied. That's a whole different ballpark. So in this case, before we can start, we have to ask ourselves a question. And that question is this: how many 1/2 can I fit into 3 wholes? So basically, here's that question again, sorry. How many 1/2 can I fit into 3 wholes? Essentially what we're doing here is I have 3 groups, and I want to see how many 1/2 will fit into those 3 groups. Now you have a set of fraction strips at home with you that I sent, and after we get done with this example, I want you to do some practice with your fraction strips, and I'll kind of walk through what I want you to do with that. But first, to show this out, I'm going to draw a picture here to represent that division problem that we just saw, 3 divided by 1/2. So here's one long strip that I'm going to cut into 3 wholes and make it pretty big so that you can see what each section is. So here's 1 hole, here's 2 holes, here's 3 holes. Okay. I'm going to draw a second box underneath, and then I'm going to cut that up, and I'm going to do kind of a darker line on the bottom. And the reason for that is because we're going to be cutting these boxes into halves to see how many halves will fit into 3 holes. Okay, and this is just, here's how many fit into 1 hole, here's how many fit into this hole, and then this box will be for the last hole. Okay, so what I want you to do now is to pause the video quick and cut the first box into however many halves will fit into 1 hole. You clicked play again. I hope yours looked something like this. There's 2 halves that fit in 1 hole. 1/2 and 1/2 make 1 hole. So now if we keep that same idea, here's another hole. How many halves will fit into that hole? If it's anything like the first one, there's going to be 2 halves in there. So I'm going to cut this in half and write 1/2 and 1/2. And if this third one is anything like those other 2, this one's also going to be 1/2 and 1/2. So now we can answer this question. How many halves can I fit into 3 holes? And then all we have to do is count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 halves fit into 3. So if I rewrite the division question here, it would look something like that. 3 divided by 1/2 equals 6. Now think back to our first video on the Show What You Know when we had those fact families and we had something divided by something equals something, and then they wanted us to do the multiplication sentence that went with it. See if you can figure out what the fact family would be for this sentence. Okay, if you went back and looked at what you did, you probably noticed that this middle number just dropped straight down. So I'm going to do that here. And in the first video, I kind of drew an X to show where our numbers are supposed to go. Remember, our answer became our leader, and our leader became our answer. So 6 times 1/2 equals 3. And I can check that. We know how to do multiplication between whole numbers and fractions, right? If I wanted to check that over here real quick, I would take 6 times 1/2. Well, what do I have to do to that 6 in order to multiply? I know you guys remember. We have to make it look like a fraction, and I have to put it on top of something. What do I put it on top of? Go ahead and write that down. If yours ended up looking like this, you're right on track. 6 over 1 times 1/2, and then we just multiply across. 6 times 1 is 6. 1 times 2 is 2. Uh-oh. I've got a big number on top of a little number. I hope you remember what that's called. If you don't, it's called an improper fraction. When the numerator is bigger than the denominator, that's an improper fraction, and we don't like those in math. We like it to be a regular fraction like 1/2, where the numerator is smaller than the denominator. So to fix it, you can go ahead and fix if you remember how to do that. If you don't, then just keep watching. In order to fix this, I take the numerator and divide it by the denominator. Remember, this fraction bar here really just means to divide. So if I put 6 in the box, 2 on the outside, 2 goes into 6 3 times. Hey, look at there. It checks. So we were right. Our picture was correct. There are 6 halves in 3 wholes. Okay? That's the first thing you're going to see. You're going to see a whole number divided by a fraction, and this is how we take care of that. The other way you'll see is when we have a fraction divided by a whole number. So we're going to write that down too. Fraction divided by whole number. So it would look something like this. 1/3 divided by 4. And some of you might be thinking, Mrs. Graber, what in the world? This number is really small. I can't divide a small number by a big number. But you can. You can, and I'll show you how to do that. Just like when we looked at this one up here and we asked ourselves a question, we're going to do the same thing down here, but it's a different question. And it's kind of complicated, so just hang on with me, okay? The question is, how much of the whole, and I'm going to highlight this word because this is really important to solving fractions divided by whole numbers. How much of the whole is each piece when 1/3 is divided into 4 equal pieces? It's a little bit longer question than the one we looked at above. Okay, these numbers here, I just want you to know, these numbers here are flexible. You can sub these out for whichever question you're working on. If they have different numbers, then just put different numbers in here. You could say how much of the whole is each piece when half is divided into 5, or whatever your numbers are. So these are flexible numbers. They're not always going to be this. This, however, is true for every problem like this. When you have a fraction divided by a whole number, this is going to have to apply. So let me ask that question one more time. How much of the whole is each piece when 1/3 is divided into 4 equal pieces? I like to draw a picture for this. It just helps me see what's going on here. So I'm going to draw kind of a bigger box down here on my paper. This is going to be my 1 whole. And you can write that on top if you want. This is that up here. Here's my whole. Okay. If this whole is cut into pieces of 1/3, what would that look like? Go ahead and cut your box into pieces of 1/3, or cut your box into thirds. This is what my box will look like. I have 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. Okay, now if I look at just this whole, or this third on the end here, this is 1/3, and if I divide that third into 4 pieces, it'll look like this. Now I've got 4 pieces in there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, you think that at this point you're done, right? Because you have your one box here, and you would say the answer to that question is 1 out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So my answer is 1/6, right? Because I'm done. I cut that third into 4 equal pieces. But we have to pay attention back to this word here. How much of the whole? Here you have one part of the third that we broke up into those 4 pieces. The rest of the whole is out here. We don't know how many pieces there are if they all look the same. So what you have to do is cut the whole into the same size pieces. So I'm going to take my line and extend it all the way across, just like this. It's not perfect, of course, but that's okay. Now I go through, because this is one whole, it's all cut the same, and now I can count my pieces. So I have 1, that stayed the same, 1 out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Let me change that up here. Okay, so we have to pay attention to that one whole again. 1 out of 112. Now, if we do the same thing that we did up here with the fact family, I have 1/3 divided by 4 equals 1/12. I want you to go ahead and write down the multiplication, the fact family here, the same as we did before. Okay, it should look something like this. That one just drops straight down. These two swap places. So 1/12 times 4 should be 1/3. Okay, I want you to pause the video real quick, do the same thing we did up here. Actually multiply this out and check your answer. See if you get 1/12. Or sorry, 1/3. See if you get 1/3 when you multiply this out. Okay, pause the video, go ahead and do that, and then when you're ready and you have your answer, hit play again. I'm assuming if you've continued that you got your answer, and I'm going to work it out real quick just to check myself. I hope we got the same. We're going to start with 1/12 times 4. And we've got another fraction times a whole number. Again, we have to do something with that whole number, just like we did up there. Oh, I remember, put it over 1. 1 times 4 is 4. 12 times 4 is, 12 times 1 is 12. Okay, I see this number here. Both of these are even. I know all even numbers have something that goes into them, because this needs to be in simplest form. So, if you already know that number, you can go ahead and simplify yourselves if you haven't done so. If you forgot that part, I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Now, if you look at these two numbers, I already said they're both even, so there's a small number that goes into them. Probably remember is 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. And 12 divided by 2 is 6. Now I have to check that. Am I done? I see 2 even numbers, so it must be able to get smaller. 2 over 6. I know 2 goes into both of those again. So 2 divided by 2 and 6 divided by 2. 2 goes into 2 one time, and 2 goes into 6 3 times. Ba-bum! 1/3 again, which is what we had in the first place. So it checks out. That one's good. Okay, now that we have our notes done, I want us to kind of pause and practice. Take out your fraction strips, and I like to keep them in the tray while I'm not using them so that they don't get all over the place, because they like to go everywhere and get lost. So please keep your numbers in your tray unless you're using them. And for this example, you're going to need your 1 whole. So go ahead and grab your 1 whole. And we're going to start by doing something similar to the first one where we had a whole number divided by a fraction. Let's do 2 divided by 1/5. So it'll look like this. 2 divided by 1/5. Can't really see my other dot. There we go. Now I know you only have 1 whole at home, so I want you to find something you can use to kind of hold your place. Here's 1 whole, and I'm just going to use my pencil. That's going to be my 2nd whole. Okay, if we have 2 divided by 1/5, go ahead and grab your 1/5 pieces out. Okay, now what we have to do is figure out how many of these will fit into my 2 holes up there. I'm going to start by putting the 1/5 underneath the 1 hole until it's filled. I'm going to watch what I'm doing here. Okay, I know you're out of 1/5 if you're following along, and I'm out of 1/5 too. So let's do a little thinking here. If I have 1 hole here, and it takes 5/5 to fill up 1 hole, how many fifths would I need to fill up this hole? And then, using that same idea, how many fifths would I need for both of them, for 2 holes? Well, if I need 5/5 for one, that means I'm going to need 5/5 for the other, which means I'll need 10 all together. And we can go ahead and work this out. If you want to draw pictures, you can. Otherwise, just kind of look back at your fraction strips. But if I drew this picture out really quick, it'll look something like this. Okay, 1 hole, 1 hole, so I have 2 holes. And remember, we did a second layer for the number we were dividing by, and then cut that with a dark line so you know this side is for this hole and this side is for that hole. Okay, we are dividing by 1/5, so I'm going to cut this into fifths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's what we have over here. Now, using that same idea, if I cut this hole into fifths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then all together, remember each one of these is a fifth, and the question for this was how many fifths fit into 2 holes. Fill the rest of these in. Then all we have to do is add up the fifths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 2 divided by 1/5 is 10. And then if you write that multiplication sentence that goes with it, that fact family, then you could easily check it. Middle number stays where it's at. First and last numbers swap. And then all you have to do is see if that's true. Actually multiply this out. See if you get 2, and if you do, then you did it right. Okay, let's do one more example of a fraction divided by a whole number. I think that one's a little harder to do. So, let's say I have 1/4 divided by 2. Okay, start by drawing your hole. Remember, we always have to keep that hole in mind. And I'm cutting my hole into fourths, into 1/4. So it'll look like this. Now I have 4 equal parts inside my hole. Okay, the question for this one was how much of the whole is each piece when 1/4 is divided into 2 equal pieces. So that means I have to focus on 1/4. I'm going to look at this top corner here. Here's my 1/4, and I have to divide it into 2 pieces. Easy. Okay, but remember, we have to keep in mind that we're looking at the whole, not just that 1/4 box. So that means I have to cut the rest of the whole to look like that 1/4 box. So it'll look like this. And then if I look at one piece of that, how much is that worth now? That one shaded part out of the total parts. Go ahead and add that up real quick and put that behind the equals. I got 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I got 1/8. Okay, and then again, if you draw that, or if you write out that multiplication sentence, like we've been practicing, then you drop down that middle number, swap the first and the last. And then you can just multiply to solve, like you've been practicing. If you get your 1/4, then that means that this number appears correct. Okay, something that I kind of forgot when you were doing your notes that I think you should add into your notes. And I did say it, but I didn't have you write it, so I want you to write this down. In order to find how much of the whole you have to cut the other pieces the same. Go ahead and write that down. Pause the video so that you can see what it says, and then click play when you're ready to move on. Okay, this is what I was talking about. In order to find how much of the whole you have to cut the rest of it to look the same. Because before we did that, it looked like this. Right, but that's not looking at the whole, that's only looking at this 1/4 up here. So in order to find out how much of the whole thing I have to cut the rest of it to look like that 1/4 that we were practicing. Okay, let's get into our books. And the numbers that I want you to work on are in the handout that you guys got at the kind of the front of your packet. So you can find that information in your packet. That way I'm not having to tell you again. So refer back to the packet, and we're going to kind of skip over those first 2 pages because we just did some practice with those. We're going to jump in right to our lesson pages here. We'll do number 1 together. Divide and check the quotient. They already have the fraction strips for you. Now, if you come to a question that has big numbers, like 3 wholes, and you don't have that many fraction strips, do like what we did in the example where you have a 1 whole, and then if you have a bigger number, then you would hold your, a second whole could be a pencil, and then a third whole could be a pen or something like that. So if you need to use other things to be your fraction strips, do that. Okay, so on this one they have the fraction strips for you. Then it says 3 divided by 1/3 equals what? And according to what we've done, all we have to do is count up however many thirds fit into 3. Because remember, the question for that, refer back to that question that we wrote down. How many 1/2s can I fit into 3 wholes? In this case, how many 1/3s can I fit into 3 wholes? All you have to do is count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this blank would be 9. And then, if we wrote the multiplication, 9 times 1/3 equals 3. And you could check that to make sure that it's true. Okay? For number 2 and number 3, I want you to kind of change the directions here. In number 2, I want you to use fraction strips. And then on number 3, I want you to draw a picture. And they give you room over here to draw a picture. So just draw it right on your page. Okay, and I'm having you do that because that's what we just practiced in this video. Okay, so here you have 3 divided by 1/6. Do the same thing as what we did up here. Set out your 1 hole, set out your extra placeholders. How many 1/6 do you need to fill up 1 hole? How many for 2 holes? How many for 3 holes? And write that number down. And then the same thing over here. This is that box 1 for number 3. A fraction divided by a whole number. Draw yourself a picture over here. And remember, you're looking at the whole, not just that one box that you're looking at. Okay? Let me just kind of flip ahead here, looking at if I need to look at some other numbers. I don't know if I said it on your paper or not, but number 10 is extra credit. You get 1 extra credit point if you get it right. EC plus 1. And then, let's see. I did have you do a couple of these word problems on the back, so I'll walk you through your word problem here. Kaylee cuts a loaf of bread into 4 equal parts. What fraction of the whole loaf does each of the 4 parts represent? So draw yourself a loaf of bread. Mine's just going to be like this. Kaylee cuts half a loaf of bread, do some cups here, into 4 equal parts. And this is important too, equal. What fraction of the whole, there's that number, or that word again, what fraction of the whole loaf does each of the 4 parts represent? So this is that fraction divided by a whole number thing. Here's half a loaf of bread, and she cuts it into 4 equal parts. Go ahead and cut yours. My parts aren't very equal. Okay, here's my half. It's cut into 4 equal parts, but remember, we're looking at the whole loaf. So that means I have to cut this other half into 4 equal parts. Then I look at one of these each. One of these out of the whole is what fraction? Something over something. Okay, and you can figure that one out on your own. Do cups on number 2, and actually do cups on all of these, because we're good at that. Okay, I know this video has been super long. I really appreciate you guys being patient with me. Make sure that if there was anything that does not make sense, that you get a hold of me either on email or through Remind. I'm trying to be as available as possible, so if you have questions, make sure to let me know, and I'll do my best to help you out. If there's a lot of people who have the same question, I'll probably make and post another video, and then I'll let you guys know that I've posted another one, okay? Good luck on those. Again, let me know if you have questions, and I'll see you guys in the next video.